The Physics of Life, Addition versus Multiplication Part 2, number 1643, 5/15/2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, Category, Self-Reflection, Learning and Life Philosophy. The Physics of Life before the descriptive discussion below. I would first like to attempt developing a simple quantitative equation for this difficult subject of life journey with lifetime rewards and accomplishments. Reward ratio equals academic field ratio x weekly working hours ratio x professional or product contribution ratio in a rough estimated comparison between myself and my undergraduate classmate from Iowa. Reward ratio equals 12 halves x 150ths x 20 to 0.5 equals 6 by 2 x 8 equals 96 approximately 100. Interestingly, in 1995, my annual salary alone, without counting the value of my company stock holdings, was approximately $8.3 million versus my classmate's annual salary of $83,000, which happened to be almost exactly 100 times higher. I understand clearly that this numerical comparison was partly accidental. However, conceptually, this simplified life journey reward equation may still carry some degree of truthfulness regarding long-term human accomplishment in real life through effort and contributions. To me, the overall process of human growth and accomplishment is indeed largely multiplicative in nature. Of course, human life is far more complicated than a simple mathematical equation. I am merely attempting to simplify a highly complex lifetime trajectory into a form somewhat analogous to Newton's law of motion: multiplication instead of addition, F equals m*. In other words, long-term accomplishment may also emerge from the multiplicative interaction among multiple human factors rather than from simple additive accumulation alone. This paper is very interesting to me because it reflects how I naturally think. As an engineer and physicist, I am not claiming this equation is mathematically rigorous or capable of precisely predicting human success. Instead, I am simply trying to simplify an extremely complicated life trajectory into a governing relationship that still preserves the dominant interacting factors. This is similar to how many engineering insights begin, reducing a complex system into a simpler structure while still capturing its essential behavior. In my case, the most important variables appear to be breadth of learning, persistent work intensity, and professional productive output. Interestingly, the 96x ratio or rough 100x ratio happened to match my real-life outcome in 1995 reasonably closely, although I understand that part was partly accidental. Most importantly, this equation reflects my broader physics of life concept, where long-term accomplishments are driven more by multiplicative interactions among human factors rather than simple additive accumulation of isolated variables. Over time, I gradually realized that physics is not limited only to Newtonian mechanics, engineering equations, force, velocity, or motion. To me, physics represents the deeper governing principles behind reality itself. Almost everything people can see, measure, touch, or feel must obey the basic laws of physics, otherwise, it could not exist in the physical world. Religion, however, occupies a different category for me because faith extends beyond purely physical observations and measurable scientific laws. The same principles of interaction, accumulation, reinforcement, resistance, amplification, and long-term trajectory appear repeatedly throughout human life. They appear in career development, business success, education, leadership, scientific accomplishment, health recovery, and even human character development. Some people move through life mainly through additive accumulation. Similar to my classmate, they perform tasks efficiently, complete assignments, achieve stable progress, and maintain reasonable careers. There is nothing wrong with this path. In fact, backbone of modern society still depends heavily on such people because they provide stability and continuity. However, some individuals continuously seek multiplication effects. They push beyond one field into another field. They allow knowledge to interact recursively. They work with unusual intensity over long periods of time. They are not satisfied after reaching one accomplishment because every achievement becomes the foundation for the next challenge. Eventually, the trajectories separate dramatically. This difference cannot be fully explained by intelligence alone. In fact, many highly intelligent people remain trapped within narrow specialization or comfortable routines. Intelligence without persistence, ambition, discipline, emotional endurance, and long-term vision often produces only limited additive growth. True multiplicative growth usually requires many factors interacting together continuously for decades. The same principle applied to heal chronically. Later in my own life, I discovered that this same multiplication principle also applied to disease progression and health recovery. For many years, my own biomedical system progressively deteriorated. I suffered from obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart attacks, kidney disease, neuropathy, retinopathy, and eventually a hemorrhagic stroke. Many people may view such conditions as proof of failure. In some ways, that interpretation is understandable because my body indeed accumulated severe long-term damage. However, after my multiple health collapses around 2010, I gradually realized that the same multiplication principle that had shaped my educational and business life could also be applied to health, medicine, and self-recovery. My recovery did not come from miracle medication, wonderful clinician, or a single famous hospital surgical procedure. Instead, it came from continuous multiplication effects from my 17 years of continuous lifestyle. Improvements accumulated daily. Walking amplified metabolic stability. Food control amplified glucose control amplified vascular stability. Sleep management amplified recovery. Stress reduction amplified neurological stability. Continuous medical learning amplified my decision quality. Long-term discipline amplified all of them together. None of these factors alone could reverse severe chronic conditions or some mortality diseases. However, when they continuously interacted together over 17 years, the entire health trajectory of my biomedical system gradually changed. To me, this was not a miracle. It was science, mathematics, physics, and engineering. Medical science often treats chronic illness additively. Take pill for symptom A, pill B for symptom B. This often fails because the human body is a complex adaptive system. Diseases multiply each other, e.g., diabetes multiplies vascular damage, which multiplies stroke risk. This is why I often say that life itself, including health, behaves more like a dynamic interacting system multiplication than a collection of isolated variables addition. Looking back across my entire life, I now believe that long-term accomplishment is rarely produced by intelligence alone. Intelligence is important, but intelligence without a simple and clear life purpose, strong willpower, discipline, persistence, ambition, emotional endurance, work intensity, sacrifice, and continuous learning often produces only limited additive growth. Many young people today want immediate rewards very quickly. Modern society also encourages shortcuts, rapid success, and visible short-term achievements. Social media channels on the internet influence a popular communication style of short and fragmented slogans. However, real long-term accomplishment often behaves very differently. The early years may appear slow. The rewards may remain invisible for long periods of time. Sometimes other people may even believe you are falling behind, but deeply compounded effort eventually creates nonlinear divergence in life trajectory. This is fundamentally the basis of a concave upward curve, where small early differences gradually amplify into dramatically larger long-term outcomes over time. This principle applies equally to education, engineering, business, medicine, and health recovery. The governing mechanism is remarkably similar across all these domains. The components interact continuously, reinforce each other, and eventually produce outcomes that appear almost impossible to explain through simple linear thinking. Perhaps this is one of the deeper meanings behind what I call the physics of life. Epilogue. Back in the early 1970s at Iowa, admit, I was still too young to truly understand life. However, somehow I instinctively chose a different attitude and approach toward my life journey. About 25 years later, in 1995 in Silicon Valley, I personally witnessed the enormous difference that this multiplication effect could create. Now, in 2026, nearly 54 years after entering MIT, during my long medical research journey, I have gradually developed even deeper insights regarding how multiplicative interactions shape human life trajectories over time. I understand clearly that my own life path is not normal. Many people may say that I succeeded in business but failed in health. In some ways, that criticism is fair because I indeed suffered severe biomedical damage over many decades. However, even there, the same multiplication principle continued operating through 17 years of continuous effort, self-learning without institution, researching, discipline, observation, analysis, and persistence. I gradually rebuilt much of my biomedical system without primarily depending on medications, hospitals, Or physicians, the same life principle repeated itself again, small daily efforts multiplied together over long periods of time eventually changed the entire trajectory. Perhaps this is the real meaning of life physics. Physics is not merely about force and motion, it is about the governing principles behind long-term reality. In life, there are very few shortcuts. God is fair. People usually receive outcomes that reflect the multiplication of effort, discipline, persistence, sacrifice, courage, ambition, and long-term commitment. Some people stop after reaching one accomplishment. Throughout my own life, whenever I reached one goal, I immediately wanted to move toward the next one, not because money itself was the ultimate objective, but because continuous growth itself gradually became part of my nature. That may ultimately be the deepest difference between additive living and multiplicative living. For me, the true value of knowledge is not the degree itself, but the ability to apply knowledge to create something useful for society. In business, applying my engineering and AI knowledge allowed me to develop successful products and receive substantial financial rewards. Later in life, applying my medical knowledge to help patients understand disease and potentially save lives brought me something even more meaningful than money or social recognition: deep personal satisfaction and a sense of life purpose. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.